Hi class. During this video, I want to go over the Excel homework problem called planets. So I have this Excel file on Canvas, and so I would recommend opening up and following along. So we're going to apply what we've been learning about with conversions and relate it to this Excel document, right? So when you're doing these Excel files, you're just applying what we've learned in the class, right? So notice I have my um, my OneNote open here on the right so I can take some notes. So I'm going to try to model how I would walk through this problem the best that I can online. Right, so just some things to point out. So if you notice here in B3 through C4, we are just told like a conversion fact between kilometers and miles, right? So we can just reference these cells when we need those values. So we have what's going on is we have planets, Mercury all the way to Pluto, and what we're given is the orbital radius in millions of kilometers. And here we're miles, we have millions of miles, and then we have this chart. So if we look to the right, the directions, right? So it says we're given a planetary scale of orbital radii in millions of kilometers. In part A, we're asked to convert these distances to miles, and then millions of miles, format to 2 decimal places. And then part C, we want to scale each of these with Earth set to 1, right? So format to 2 decimal places, we'll work through that. And then we have some questions to answer in a chart, right? So we'll walk through those, right? So the first thing that I want to do is I want to convert the millions kilometers into miles, right? So let me make some notes off to the side. Right? So let me just look at this first one, right? Walk how we would do it walk through it how we would do it on paper, so then we can build the right Excel formula. So if I have 57.9 million kilometers, and so the question is, I want to fill in blank number of miles, right? So I know a conversion fact between miles and kilometers, right? So at first, let's just ignore the million part for a moment, right? So let's ignore that part for a moment. So if I just had 57.9 kilometers, and I wanted to convert this into miles, right? Then if we use dimensional analysis, I'm going to want kilometers on the bottom and miles on the top, right? So that way my kilometers cancel out. So then if I look over here at my fact, right, I can fill this in. There's 1 kilometer for 0.621 miles, right? So this would give me my answer in miles. So now we have to think about applying this million part, right? So this would work going from kilometers into miles, but we started with million miles, right? So what you would need to do is take 57.9 and then multiply it by 10 to the 6th, and this would put it in kilometers, right? So we're converting this value back into just 1 kilometer instead of millions of kilometers. And 10 to the 6th is equal to a million, right? So then if I put this over 1 and then multiply that times this unit fraction here, I just pull that down, then we'll have things set up, right? So that's how I would go about doing this by hand. So let's think about what kind of Excel formula I would need, right? So I would need to take cell C9 multiplied by 10 to the 6th, right? So here's a asterisk, right? So let me write how I would type that in Excel, right? So we would write 10 and then you do the caret key and then 6, right? So C9 times 10 to the 6th, and then I would need to multiply that times cell C4, right? So now what I want to think about also is I mean, if you look at the Excel document, we're not going to want to take this formula and move it to the right or left, right? It doesn't really make sense in our Excel document. But I am going to want to fill it down, right? So let's think about what would change if I fill it down one row, let's say, right? So if I fill this down one row, right, what would happen is we would get what C10 times 10 to the 6th times, and this would be what, C5. So let's see if that's what I would want to happen, right? So I'm basically looking at for Venus, right? So for Venus, I would want to take cell C10 times 10 to the 6th, which I have, and then multiply it by, I want to multiply it by C4 still, right? So I don't want this row to change right here. So to fix that, I need to put a dollar sign in front of the 4 to make this C $4, and that will lock in that row so it doesn't change, right? So this should be the Excel formula I need, right? So let me type this in. Right, so we can do equals, so C9 times 10 to the 6th times, and then we want this cell, and we want to lock in the 4, right? So hit enter, and then, see, I don't know if we were told to format this any particular way. Yeah, it doesn't say to format any particular way. But what I would do is go up here to number. So let's open this box, and I would just go to number here for the category, and then I would say let's do 0 decimal places, and I think having this 1,000 separator comma is real important, right? So let's hit OK, and so that just puts my number in an easier format to look at, right? So I can go ahead and drag this down and get all of those distances, right, in miles. So now, for this column, we want to convert these distances into millions of miles, right? So again, let me go over here to my paper and let's think through this a little bit. So if I know miles, so if I want to go from miles and I want to convert this into million miles, right? Essentially all I need to do is take like cell D9, right, for Mercury, and divide it by 10 to the 6th, right? So in doing so, that will convert it into millions of miles, right? So imagine I had 1 million, so 1 comma 0 0 0 comma 0 0 0 and for there. That would just say, well, how many million do you have there? How many groups of a million, right? So to get this row, we just need to hit equals and then reference this cell divided by 10 to the 6th, right? And we were told to format this to 2 decimal places, right? So I'll go back here, put this for a number, and we want 2 decimal places, right? So I'll go ahead and do the 1,000 comma separator, in case we have one that goes into the 1,000 spot. Right, so I just formatted this to have 2 decimal places with the comma separator, right, if needed. And we can think about for a moment filling this down, right? So the only cell reference I have is D9. If I fill this down, it's going to change the 9, right, each time, which we want that to happen, right? So I can just fill this down the way it is. And if I just pick one to click on just to double check, that would be correct, right? I want to take whatever's to the left and divide by 1,000,000, which is 10 to the 6th. Right? So now all of these are in millions of miles. Right? So let's see, we've done part A, done part B. So now part C is where we're scaling the 3 rows of data where Earth is set to 1. Right? And I want 2 decimal places here also. Right? So what I would do is I'm just going to go ahead and highlight this range where I'm going to be inputting, and I'm going to go here and format. Make this a number format with the 1,000 comma separator and 2 decimal places, right? So I'm going to hit OK. So that way I don't have to worry about all those numbers. It's already going to be formatted the way I would like. Alright, so this one's going to take some thought, right? So let's click in this box and think about how I would get this box, right? So I'm going to highlight this box. We'll do green, right? Or I already have green. I'll do orange, right? We don't have orange in the Excel document yet, right? So I'm talking about this orange box I just made orange, right? So F9. So let's think about what formula I would want to put in F9, right? So in F9, oops, let me scroll down. So I'm worried about F9, right? So what I want to do, so let me just do this by hand for a moment. So this box is going to take this 57.9 value, which is in millions of kilometers. And I want to convert this with Earth scale to 1, right? So in my ratio, I'm doing Mercury to the Earth, right? So I'll just do M over E just to remind me, right? So this is just a reminder. So Mercury's on the top, right? So we have 57.9 million kilometers here. And then for the Earth, we have, 149.6? And this is also in million kilometers. And then what we're trying to figure out is here x, right? We're trying to scale this to 1, so I need to figure out what x is. So if we do some proportion solving, x would be equal to, 57.9 million kilometers divided by the 149.6 million kilometers. Right? So one thing we want to notice also here is that my units are going to cancel, right? So I have kilometers over kilometers and million over million. So that million kilometer units go away, and we're just stuck with this, right? So let's think about how this was calculated, the Excel formula, right? So I'm going to have equals. So this 57.9 number is cell C9, right? So this will be cell C9. And I want to divide it by the Earth. So this 149.6 number, which is cell C11, looks like C11. Right, let me double check. So here's C9, here's C11, right? Yep. So then, so this is the formula that I want to input in that box, right? But again, I want to be smart and input this in a way that I can just fill it to the right and then down, right? And it'll calculate the right values for me. So if you think about this for a moment, when I fill down, right, what could possibly change would be the 9 or the 11, right? So we have to think about a moment, do we want those to change? Well, if we're comparing everything to the Earth, we're not going to want the 11 to change, right? I'm going to want that to stay consistent. So to keep that locked in, I need to put a dollar sign in front of 11, right? Because again, I want to compare, I want to scale everything to 1, every quantity, right? So I need to put a dollar sign in front of 11, right? So that's the only thing I need to worry about. And then think about filling it right? Are there anything I want to lock in? So if I fill this over, do I want this to change, for example? And I would, right? I would want this value to change because I would want to switch over to the miles unit. And I would also want this to go over also, right? Carry over to the Earth, right? So if I write this formula in, it should work, right? So we have C9 divided by C $11. Right? So I'm going to go ahead and make that that color as before. And then I'm going to pull this over and then bring it down. Right? Right, so if I make these bold here just to emphasize that that's scaling it to 1, right? Which this should be equal to 1, right? We're setting the Earth equal to 1, and how does everything else compare, right? So now we have some questions to answer. So part D says if you're going to create a planetary scale with Earth set to 1, does it matter what units are used for the original scale? And the answer is no, right? The reason why it doesn't matter is because if I set this equal to one foot, right, then all of these would just be units would just be in feet, right? These are unitless values, right? So we saw over here that the million kilometers canceled out, right? So this would happen every time. So if we were talking about miles, the miles would cancel out. If we're talking million miles, those would cancel out also. So the nice thing about unitless things is we can just give whatever units that we want as long as it's consistent, right? So if I do, I don't know, miles for Mercury, then when I get to Saturn, this would just have to be 9.55 miles, right? We'd have to use the same units, right? So then part E says, are the scales that you created in part C with Earth set to 1 unitless? And that is yes, right? So we already discovered that, how my units canceled out, right? Oops. Right, so like how the million kilometers canceled out, right? And then lastly, part F is to create a well-labeled bar chart comparing the orbital radii, right? So what I would do is select these two. So go from cell B8 to C18, select those, and then come up here to insert. And then you can collect the recommended charts, right? Or you can go to bar. So the recommended charts usually pops up something pretty nice, right? Some good options. So like here's a good chart. I like this one for this graph, how they're going sideways, but it's just a personal preference, right? You can pick which bar chart you think would work well. So here's my bar chart. You can change how it looks up here, right? So if you want something dark like that, that's perfectly fine, right? But I think that's pretty well labeled, right? There's not really much more we need to do. It has a good title. I mean, we could add a horizontal label just to emphasize these are in millions of kilometers, but that's actually in our chart title. So that's a pretty good graph, right? So this one was pretty easy to make this graph. You could just leave it like this, right? That looks perfectly fine. All right, so that's all I have for this problem. Thanks, guys.